Do you ever think about those things from the 1970s that only showed up in homes where money was tight? These 50 things shaped childhoods built on making do, stretching every dollar, and finding pride in what little you had. What did growing up without much really look like back then? A mix of comfort and alarm. Gasoline left in open containers was another ordinary hazard of the 1970s. People stored spare fuel in garages, sheds, or even glass jars without sealed lids. The strong smell filled the air, and kids often played nearby, oblivious to the danger. Sometimes children even dipped sticks into cans, lighting them like torches for fun. Jars tipped over easily, soaking floors with flammable puddles that adults casually wiped up. The risk of sparks from tools or cigarettes never crossed people's minds until disasters happened. It was seen as practical, having extra gas on hand for lawnmowers, cars, or emergencies. Plastic containers with safety spouts did not become common until much later. Back then, cans often leaked, tipped over, or sat open in the heat, creating enormous fire risks. Families accepted it as normal, part of maintaining a household. Only in hindsight does it seem shocking how casually people treated something so volatile. For many, the smell of gasoline in a garage is a powerful memory of childhood, both nostalgic and unsettling given what we now know. Hostess Choco Bliss cakes were the 1970s most decadent sugar bomb, a double-layered chocolate overload that managed to make even chocoholics pause. Each one was coated in fudge, filled with more fudge, and stacked on fudge-like cake. One bite felt like diving headfirst into a vat of cocoa. They were so dense that they could double as paperweights, yet somehow irresistible. The glossy surface shimmered under cafeteria lights like it had been polished for presentation. You didn't eat a Choco Bliss, you survived it. The texture was dense and sticky, like eating dessert cement. Even die-hard Hostess fans admitted they needed milk, or mercy, to finish one. But that first bite? It was pure euphoria, rich and unapologetically sweet. These cakes turned lunchboxes into treasure chests and after-school snacks into sugar-fueled adventures. They were everything the 1970s loved, indulgent, over-the-top, and blissfully artificial. Eventually, even Hostess had to admit they'd gone too far and retired them quietly. But for anyone who lived through it, Choco Bliss wasn't just dessert. It was a challenge, a memory, and the ultimate test of how much chocolate one human could handle. Oreo Big Stuff. Playing a Charlie Brown Christmas soundtrack was a tradition that transcended generations. Vince Guaraldi's piano was soft yet full of feeling, echoing through homes as families decorated trees or wrapped presents late into the night. The jazzy notes of Linus and Lucy carried both happiness and melancholy, the sound of childhood innocence mixed with adult reflection. In an era when the world seemed simpler but emotions ran deep, this music struck a perfect balance. It wasn't just background noise, it was the heartbeat of the season. Even kids who didn't fully understand jazz could feel the warmth of those chords, like a musical fireplace crackling in the background. The soundtrack brought people together in a quiet, almost sacred way. Parents could sit in silence, sipping coffee or cocoa, while the record spun, feeling the calm that only Christmas could bring. It was as if the album itself held the same fragile hope that Charlie Brown searched for every year, the belief that small, sincere things mattered most. Hearing those familiar melodies today still brings back the soft glow of colored lights and the comfort of being together. It reminds us that Christmas isn't about perfection, it's about heart. Homemade breakfast in the 1970s was a ritual built around cereal boxes stacked in every kitchen. Kids poured them into bowls by the handful. Parents grabbed a quick serving before work, and the sugary mascots promised energy for the whole day. But many of those cereals carried preservatives in high doses, BHA and BHT. These additives were meant to keep cereals crisp, colorful, and long-lasting, and for years, no one thought twice about it. A box could sit on the shelf for months and still taste fresh. Yet when studies began connecting BHA and BHT to health risks, the trust began to crumble. Consumers wondered if their morning ritual was quietly doing harm, and headlines only fueled the fear. Cereal makers pushed back, arguing the doses were safe, but the damage was done. By the end of the decade, reformulations began, and the loud claims of "now safer" only made families more suspicious. Imagine being a parent and realizing the food you thought was wholesome for your children had been filled with questionable chemicals. It cast a shadow on one of the happiest parts of the day, the sound of cereal hitting the bowl. Even now, people look back on those bright boxes with nostalgia, but also unease. Central fireplaces once anchored living rooms as the warm heart of the home. Built from brick or stone, these wood-burning hearths provided both heat and atmosphere. Families gathered around them during winter evenings, watching flames dance while conversations flowed. Fireplaces were focal points, often adorned with mantels that displayed family photos, clocks, or holiday decorations. They symbolized warmth, security, and tradition. But as heating systems advanced, fireplaces became less essential. Many wood-burning designs were converted to gas inserts, offering convenience without the mess of chopping wood or cleaning ashes. Today, electric fireplaces provide the look of flames with none of the labor. While modern versions still create ambiance, they lack the crackle and scent of real logs. The central fireplace has shifted from necessity to luxury, more decorative than practical. Yet for those who grew up with one, the memory of glowing embers and the sound of wood popping remains tied to a sense of home that technology cannot replace. Bookshelves, 18 in many states, was a reality that shocks people today. In the 1970s, teenagers who had barely graduated high school could walk into a corner store, hand over a few dollars, and buy a six-pack of beer without question. It was legal in dozens of states, and for many, it was a rite of passage. College towns thrived on it, with freshmen celebrating their new freedom not just with dorm parties, but with legal trips to the bar. Parents often shrugged it off as part of growing up, and bartenders rarely turned anyone away as long as they had the cash. The culture of the time simply did not see alcohol as something that needed to be as tightly regulated as it is now. Campaigns against drunk driving had not yet reached their peak, and laws varied widely from state to state. For those who lived through it, the memory of grabbing a beer at 18 still lingers as a sign of how relaxed society once was. It feels almost unthinkable now, but in the 1970s it was just normal life. School peanut butter and jelly in a can was one of those 1970s ideas that sounded convenient but ended in chaos. The concept was simple: a pre-mixed spread combining both peanut butter and jelly so you could skip a step. But what came out of that can was a pinkish-brown sludge that defied the laws of appetite. The texture looked like someone blended lunch and regret. It came out in thick ribbons that made every sandwich look like a crime scene. Even the smell, part sweet, part salty, part metallic, could ruin your appetite before the first bite. The peanut butter was oily, the jelly was grainy, and somehow they canceled each other out completely. It smelled like someone's lunchbox left in the sun. Even worse, it came in a metal can, so you had to open it like dog food before slathering it on bread. Ads called it a modern miracle for busy families, which was marketing code for "please ignore the texture." Kids hated it. Adults pretended it was fine. And eventually, everyone went back to the normal way: 2 jars, 1 knife, and 0 shame. Peanut butter and jelly in a can was proof that some things in life just aren't meant to be simplified. Hubba Bubba. Gifts made Christmas mornings in the 70s unforgettable. There was nothing like unwrapping a Lite-brite set, an easy-bake oven, or a Stretch Armstrong and feeling like the luckiest kid in the world. These weren't just toys. They were dreams in boxes, carefully hidden by parents for weeks before the big day. The soft crackle of wrapping paper, the squeal of excitement, and the proud demonstration of how each toy worked became moments frozen in memory. Every commercial on Saturday morning television had built up the suspense, and now it was real. You could bake a tiny cake or stretch a rubber hero clear across the living room. Even the smell of warm plastic or cardboard packaging became part of the magic. The toys connected siblings, friends, and cousins in ways nothing else could, sparking imagination and play that lasted long after the holidays. They were simple, yes, but they brought endless joy. Looking back now, those small boxes under the tree held something far greater than toys. They held wonder, creativity, and the proof that sometimes happiness really can be wrapped in paper and tied with a bow. Homemade fudge, supermarket coolers in the 1970s carried neat rows of veal in vacuum-sealed plastic packs. To shoppers, it looked modern, clean, and convenient, a sign of progress in food storage. But many of those veal cuts came from calves treated with growth hormones designed to boost yield. For ranchers, hormones were sold as an easy way to keep up with rising demand, especially as more families turned to veal as a cheaper alternative to beef. Ads rarely mentioned the treatments, leaving consumers with no idea of what was happening before the meat reached the shelves. What seemed like a simple, trusted protein was anything but. At the time, few questioned it. Meat was meat, and families were happy to buy whatever stretched the budget. But concerns about hormones in food began to mount, with health advocates warning about long-term effects on consumers, especially children. The glossy packages no longer looked so harmless when whispers of risk grew louder. Eventually, restrictions tightened, and hormone-enhanced veal disappeared from shelves. For shoppers who had trusted the coolers, it felt like another betrayal. They had been buying convenience, but hidden inside was something far more complicated. The ban left veal with a stigma it still has not fully shaken. Heavy drapes and valances framed the windows of 1970s homes, cloaking rooms in thick fabrics and ornate folds. These curtains were meant to impress, giving living and dining rooms a sense of formality and weight. Deep burgundies, golds, and browns dominated, often matching the upholstery or carpets. The goal was elegance, privacy, and insulation from drafty windows. But the effect was often heavy, making rooms darker and smaller. Families lived with drawn curtains that kept out light, adding to the moody tones of wood paneling and carpeted floors. By the late 20th century, tastes shifted toward lighter, airier designs. Minimalist blinds, sheer panels, and simple roller shades replaced the layers of fabric, letting in natural light and opening up spaces. Today, windows are celebrated as focal points, framed with clean lines rather than hidden behind ornate dressings. Yet for those who grew up in such homes, the pull of a heavy drape still recalls mornings when sunlight struggled to break through, and evenings when curtains closed tight created a cocoon of comfort. Heavy though they were, those drapes framed memories as much as windows. Spray paint sold without age limits was a curious mix of creativity and danger. In the 1970s, cans of spray paint lined hardware store shelves, and anyone, kids, teenagers, or adults, could buy them freely. There were no restrictions, no warnings about misuse, and no one asking for identification at checkout. For many kids, spray paint was simply a tool for school projects, model kits, or art experiments. But it also became a temptation for graffiti, vandalism, and even dangerous inhalation. The fumes were strong and often overwhelming, yet kids used them in closed garages or basements without masks or ventilation. Some experimented with huffing, inhaling the chemicals in ways that were not only harmful, but sometimes fatal. Communities eventually caught on, and laws were passed to limit access, but in the 1970s, spray paint felt like just another household product. The rattling ball inside the can, the hiss of paint spraying out, and the smell of chemicals in the air are all tied to the memory of the time. Parents rarely worried as long as the paint was used responsibly and stores were unconcerned with who bought it. Looking back, the lack of restrictions seems unbelievable, but it reflects how differently people viewed risk and responsibility in that era. Rice or puffed wheat cereal was another grocery item poor kids could not forget. It came in giant plastic bags, so big they barely fit into the pantry. The cereal itself was bland, light, and tasted like cardboard without help, but it was cheap and lasted forever. Mothers dumped heaps of sugar on top just to make it palatable, turning breakfast into a half-sweet, half-grain ritual. Kids would crunch through mountains of it, sometimes soggy, sometimes stale, but always there in the morning. The sound of that oversized bag crinkling was part of every poor family's kitchen soundtrack. It did not come in colorful boxes with prizes or mascots, but it filled bellies for pennies. Families bought it by the sack because it stretched across countless mornings. Looking back, it might not have been anyone's favorite, but it was dependable, and every poor kid remembered it. Mock banana extract was a curious ball ornaments, and shiny bright sets were the crown jewels of any Christmas tree. Each delicate orb shimmered under the glow of colored lights, their hand-painted designs catching every flicker. Opening that old cardboard box each year felt like uncovering treasure, layers of tissue paper protecting memories from years gone by. The moment you lifted the lid, the faint scent of old paper and glass dust filled the air, taking you straight back to childhood. Kids chose their favorites carefully. A red one for luck, a gold one for beauty, a blue one just because it looked like winter. And no matter how old the ornaments got, they still sparkled with the same light that once made whole families stop and stare. Parents warned kids to be gentle, and for good reason. One wrong move and the fragile glass would shatter like a snowflake. But that fragility made them even more special. These ornaments had history, often passed down or carefully saved from earlier decades. Their soft metallic sheen made every tree feel elegant, even in the most modest home. And while modern plastic ornaments might be safer, they'll never carry the same soul. Every scratch and faded stripe told a story, a silent record of Christmases that came before. For many, the sound of those ornaments clinking together meant it was finally the holidays again. Bread has always been a staple in American kitchens, but in the 1970s, even something that simple carried hidden risks. Farmers used mercury compounds to treat seeds, protecting crops from fungus before planting. The problem came when trace amounts of those chemicals made their way into harvested grain and, eventually, into bread. Families slicing into a fresh loaf had no idea they were taking in something toxic. For decades, bread was considered one of the safest, most reliable foods, so the idea that it carried invisible danger shook people deeply. It forced families to question whether the government was truly protecting their most basic foods. It was not the kind of hazard you could taste or smell, but the damage was very real. Mercury exposure carried serious health risks, and the discovery sent shockwaves through food safety circles. Once the link was clear, the practice of using mercury seed treatments was banned outright, closing the door on one of the most unsettling chapters in everyday food history. For many who lived through it, the idea that even a slice of bread could be unsafe still feels shocking. Bread was supposed to be the most dependable food of all. Walk iron railings and dividers brought a decorative flourish to 1970s homes. Often painted black or gold, these metal fixtures were installed not only along staircases, but also as partitions between living and dining areas. They added a sense of formality and flair, with swirls, curls, and geometric patterns that were meant to feel sophisticated. Families lived among these dividers, sometimes peering through them to watch television or talk across rooms. They were cheaper than building walls and gave the illusion of separation while still allowing light to pass through. But over time, their ornate style began to feel dated. Homeowners replaced them with drywall, glass panels, or simply removed them altogether to embrace open layouts. Modern staircases now highlight sleek wood, glass, or minimalist metal rails that emphasize simplicity and space. The wrought iron curls and twists of the past are mostly gone, resurfacing only in retro-themed renovations or as ironic nods to vintage design. Yet, for many, they recall evenings of leaning against the cool metal or running hands along the curved bars as children played. They were as much a part of daily life as the furniture itself. Patterned ground equipment on concrete was one of the most unforgiving features of childhood in the 1970s. Jungle gyms, swings, seesaws, and monkey bars were bolted directly into asphalt or packed dirt. Kids climbed to dizzying heights, swung as far as they could, and when they fell, they hit hard. Scraped knees, bloody elbows, and broken bones were part of the package. Parents brushed it off as kids being kids, and teachers handed out bandages without calling an ambulance. Children dared each other to climb higher or jump farther, often taking risks that ended with painful falls. Merry-go-rounds spun so fast that kids were thrown across the blacktop, tumbling and laughing even through tears. Metal slides burned legs in summer heat, yet kids lined up for another turn. Playgrounds were meant to toughen children up, not cushion them. Metal slides baked in the summer sun, scorching bare legs, while merry-go-rounds spun children so fast they were flung off into the pavement. Today, safety codes require rubber mats, wood chips, and safer equipment. But in the 1970s, it was about adventure and risk. Looking back, it seems shocking that children were left to climb metal towers over concrete with no helmets or padding, but at the time it felt normal and even fun. Toys. Potato snacks were marketed as the healthy alternative to chips, which was like calling lava a warm bath. They were made from real baked potato skins, giving them the illusion of being wholesome. In reality, they were just salty, crunchy slabs of sodium that made you crave a gallon of water. They came in flavors like cheddar and bacon, sour cream, and even loaded potato, which all somehow tasted like plain salt with attitude. The texture was oddly thick, giving every bite a satisfying crunch followed by instant thirst. Bars and bowling alleys loved them because they kept people buying drinks. The flavor options, cheddar, bacon, and ranch, sounded sophisticated until you realized they all tasted the same. The packaging bragged about natural ingredients, which really meant we used potatoes once. Still, they had an addictive crunch that kept people reaching for more. Bars loved serving them, and teenagers devoured them during late-night movie marathons. They were messy, greasy, and crumbly in all the right ways, fake health food that didn't even pretend too hard. Eventually, they disappeared from shelves, but their memory lingers as the perfect example of 1970s snack deception. Pretend it's good for you, and you can eat twice as much. Toffee candy. Every December, sanctuaries filled with the scent of pine wreaths and candle wax as families gathered to watch children perform the nativity story. Folding chairs creaked, mothers straightened tinsel halos, and fathers fumbled with old camcorders or Polaroid cameras, waiting for the lights to dim. The play was always the same. Mary and Joseph seeking shelter, shepherds with bathrobes for costumes, and a plastic baby doll resting in a wooden manger. But somehow it never lost its power. The moment the first candle was lit and the opening hymn began, something sacred filled the air. For many kids, standing on that stage was their first moment of wonder, the first time they understood that Christmas was about more than presents. The crowd's soft laughter at forgotten lines or crooked angel wings only made the night more real, more human. When the congregation joined in singing Silent Night at the end, candles flickering in every hand, the church glowed with warmth and peace that words can't quite capture. Walking out into the cold afterward, bundled in coats and scarves, people carried that light home with them, a gentle reminder of what the season truly meant. Every December, sanctuaries filled with the scent of pine wreaths and candle wax as families gathered to watch children perform the nativity story. Folding chairs creaked, mothers straightened tinsel halos, and fathers fumbled with old camcorders or Polaroid cameras, waiting for the lights to dim. The play was always the same. Mary and Joseph seeking shelter, shepherds with bathrobes for costumes, and a plastic baby doll resting in a wooden manger. But somehow it never lost its power. The moment the first candle was lit and the opening hymn began, something sacred filled the air. For many kids, standing on that stage was their first moment of wonder, the first time they understood that Christmas was about more than presents. The crowd's soft laughter at forgotten lines or crooked angel wings only made the night more real, more human. When the congregation joined in singing Silent Night at the end, candles flickering in every hand, the church glowed with warmth and peace that words can't quite capture. Walking out into the cold afterward, bundled in coats and scarves, people carried that light home with them, a gentle reminder of what the season truly meant. Summer in the 1970s meant sticky fingers, melting popsicles, and neon colors that seemed to glow under the sun. Those eye-catching shades often came from azo dyes, a class of artificial colors that gave treats their unforgettable brightness. Kids loved the electric blues and fire engine reds, and parents rarely questioned what was behind them. At the time, bright colors were marketed as fun and harmless, the kind of thing that made summer feel magical. Few realized those same colors were the result of chemical shortcuts rather than natural ingredients. The truth, however, was less cheerful. Studies began linking certain azo dyes to hyperactivity in children and potential long-term health risks. What had once been sold as harmless fun turned into a controversial additive under fire. Regulators eventually banned several of these dyes, forcing companies to dial back the neon glow of childhood. For many who grew up then, the memory of those rainbow popsicles is tied to long afternoons and sticky smiles. But beneath the nostalgia lingers an unease. If something so simple could be banned, what else in the freezer carried risks we never knew about? Formica countertops defined the 1970s kitchen aesthetic. With bold patterns, glossy finishes, and an unbeatable price tag, Formica was the material of choice for middle-class families. Countertops bloomed with swirls, speckles, and faux wood designs that added a splash of personality to every meal. Durable and affordable, they resisted stains and scratches, making them a practical solution for busy households. Children sat at these counters doing homework, while parents prepared family dinners on surfaces that never asked for much more than a wipe-down. But design tastes evolved, and the loud patterns of Formica began to feel cheap rather than chic. By the late 1980s and 1990s, granite, marble, and butcher block became the markers of a modern kitchen. Today, quartz dominates, prized for its durability and subtle elegance. Formica has not disappeared entirely, but its reputation has shifted from fashionable to nostalgic. The once bold patterns now spark memories of family kitchens filled with laughter, birthday cakes, and the clatter of dishes. While modern counters aim for timeless neutrality, Formica reminds us of a time when kitchens were not afraid to be loud, colorful, and uniquely their own. Smoking was everywhere in the 1980s. Not just on sidewalks or street corners, but inside diners, airplanes, grocery stores, even hospitals. Ashtrays were bolted to fast food tables. The clink of ice in a glass mixed with the flick of a lighter. Office meetings were held through a fog of cigarette smoke. Passengers lit up at 30,000 feet in a sealed cabin, and nobody said a word. There were smoking sections in restaurants, but no real barriers. Just a vague separation by aisle or air vent. It was part of the scenery, part of the culture. But today, smoking indoors is banned in most public spaces across the United States. What once symbolized adulthood now reads as a health hazard. But at the time, it was just background noise, something that hung in the curtains and clung to your coat. And if the air in those spaces was thick with smoke, it was also filled with something else that seems almost unbelievable now: medicine sold without oversight. Kempf was the cookie that asked, "What if one Oreo could feed a family of 4?" And somehow, Nabisco said yes. It was massive. One giant Oreo stuffed with enough creme to drown in. When you first saw it, it was glorious. A dream come true for anyone who ever twisted open a regular Oreo and wished there was more. But then you tried to eat it. The ratio of cookie to filling was all wrong. It was like chewing through a sugary mattress wedged between 2 chocolate manhole covers. Every bite oozed frosting that coated your fingers, your plate, and probably your soul. Kids loved the size, parents loved the novelty, and dentists loved the job security. The big stuff came individually wrapped, practically a meal in itself. It wasn't a snack, it was an experience, one that required a napkin, a knife, and possibly an intervention. The commercials made it look heroic, but in real life, it was a logistical nightmare. You couldn't dunk it in milk unless you had a bucket, and breaking it apart just made a mess. Within a few short years, Oreo quietly retired it, realizing maybe there really was such a thing as too much of a good thing. But for those who remember it, the Oreo Big Stuff remains the ultimate 1980s excess, sweet, silly, and far too big for its own good. Pronto pudding mix was visiting the local shopping mall. Santa was a sacred family outing. Parents dressed their kids in itchy sweaters, combed their hair perfectly, and lined up for what felt like hours just to get a Polaroid with the big man himself. The Santas might have had cottony fake beards and slightly tired eyes, but to the children, they were as real as could be. Some kids froze completely, staring in awe, while others burst into tears the second they were lifted onto Santa's lap. Parents laughed through it all, clutching shopping bags filled with toys they swore were from the elves. And when that warm, slightly blurry photo slid out of the camera, it became proof that Christmas magic was real, at least for one more year. Malls transformed into glowing wonderlands of fake snow, candy canes, and jingling soundtracks that played on endless loops. For many families, that one photo on Santa's lap captured a moment of pure childhood belief, a look of awe that could never be replicated. The scent of pretzels and cinnamon sugar in the air made everything feel bigger, brighter, and completely magical. Even when the photos came out overexposed or crooked, they became treasures, taped to refrigerators or tucked into family albums. That visit to Santa wasn't just a picture. It was a promise that Christmas dreams were still possible. The 1970s were full of do-it-yourself food kits that promised to bring fun into the kitchen. One of the most popular was Rennet tablets, sold in small boxes with instructions for turning milk into pudding or custard. Parents bought them eagerly, seeing them as an educational and wholesome way to teach kids about food. The process was simple. Dissolve a tablet in milk, let it set, and watch the magic of science turn into dessert. Children were fascinated, and for a time, rennet pudding was a kitchen project nearly every family tried. But beneath the fun was a problem. The tablets were made with enzymes sourced from the stomach lining of calves, something rarely explained clearly on the labels. Parents who thought they were buying a simple dessert mix later discovered they had been serving something far more complex and unsettling. As concerns about labeling and child safety grew, regulators began to crack down. Parents demanded transparency, and eventually the tablets were pulled from shelves for home use. For many who grew up then, the memory of stirring rennet pudding is tinged with unease. It was a childhood science experiment with an ingredient no one fully understood. It stands as an example of how even the most innocent-looking products could hide truths that families never expected. Popcorn ceilings were once a builder's dream. The textured spray, popular in the 1970s, covered imperfections quickly and gave ceilings a distinctive, bumpy look. It was considered modern and stylish at the time, adding a sense of depth and even helping to dampen sound. For families moving into newly built homes, a popcorn ceiling was a sign of freshness and contemporary design. Yet over the decades, the novelty wore off. The texture trapped dust and cobwebs, making cleaning a nightmare. Worse still, many popcorn ceilings from the era contained asbestos, a health hazard that turned once trendy design into a dangerous liability. By the 1990s, homeowners were scraping, sanding, and replacing popcorn ceilings with flat, smooth finishes. Today, the style is widely considered outdated, something to be removed during renovations rather than preserved. Smooth ceilings with recessed lighting have taken over, reflecting light and creating a sense of clean openness. The popcorn ceiling now stands as a symbol of a past era, often mocked in real estate listings or renovation shows. Yet for those who grew up staring at them while lying on their beds, the sight of those bumpy patterns may still stir memories of childhood bedrooms and family homes that, imperfections and all, felt like safe havens. Secondhand car seats from the junkyard were not just an option in the 1970s, they were common practice. Families with tight budgets often skipped buying new car seats and instead picked up old ones at thrift stores, garage sales, or even straight from junkyards. The idea of expiration dates, safety testing, or regulations barely existed, and parents assumed that as long as a seat looked sturdy, it was good enough. Some were nothing more than plastic shells with thin straps, designed more for convenience than actual protection. Infants and toddlers sat in them on long drives, bouncing around without the security we expect today. Parents believed they were doing the responsible thing by having some sort of car seat, even if it had been passed down for years or scavenged secondhand. The truth is, those seats offered little real protection in an accident, but few people knew that then. Safety campaigns were still in their infancy, and buying brand new seats was often too expensive for working families. Looking back, It feels shocking to think of babies riding around in secondhand car seats with fraying straps or missing parts, but at the time, it was simply practical. Those old seats symbolize both the resourcefulness and the risks of parenting in the 1970s. Dramaticers were snacks for the weird kids. Caramel popcorn in a black and yellow box covered with absurd jokes and random nonsense. Unlike Cracker Jack, there was no prize inside. The humor was the reward. It was one of the first snacks to market itself with attitude instead of flavor. Each box read like a comedy skit with lines that made no sense but made you laugh anyway. It was marketing so strange that adults didn't know if it was for kids or for philosophers. Eating it felt like being in on a private joke the rest of the world didn't get. The popcorn itself was oddly addictive, sweet, buttery, and just crunchy enough to keep you hooked. But the box was the real star, filled with bizarre copywriting that made you laugh even if you didn't get it. It was marketing genius disguised as mayhem. Screaming yellow zonkers didn't pretend to be healthy or even particularly tasty. It was all about fun, sarcasm, and breaking the rules. Kids loved it, parents were baffled, and the brand became a cult classic for anyone who appreciated snacks that didn't take themselves too seriously. It was the 1970s in a nutshell. Weird, loud, and too funny to forget. Aluminum and tinsel Christmas trees brought a futuristic shimmer to living rooms across America. Those shiny silver branches reflected every bit of light in the room, turning simple colored bulbs into something almost cosmic. Some families paired them with rotating color wheels, bathing their trees in slow, dreamy waves of red, blue, green, and gold. Kids would sit cross-legged on shag carpets, their eyes wide as the colors shifted like magic right before them. Parents would sip coffee and smile, knowing that even this space-age tree somehow captured the same old-fashioned joy. And when guests visited, everyone had the same reaction: astonishment followed by the quiet admission that maybe the future really could sparkle. It was the 70s version of glamour. Artificial, sure, but beautiful in its own unapologetic way. The sound of wrapping paper and Perry Como on vinyl mixed perfectly with the soft whir of the motorized light wheel. Decorating those metallic trees was less about tradition and more about style, but somehow they still captured the spirit of the season. Every glint off a tinsel branch reminded people that the holidays could still feel bright even when times were tight. They might look kitschy now, but back then they were pure magic, an explosion of color in homes that needed a little sparkle. In the 1970s, spray cheese felt like the future. Kids marveled at the push of a nozzle that turned a can into an instant snack, and parents loved the convenience of spreading cheese on crackers without dirtying a knife. Grocery stores lined shelves with rows of those shiny cans, and they became a common sight at family parties, game nights, and even in school lunches. What many did not realize was that those early aerosol cheese formulations were loaded with nitrites. At the time, nitrites were a popular preservative, used to keep foods colorful and fresh-looking. They gave that cheese its familiar golden shade and helped it stay shelf-stable for months. But as studies mounted, the risks began to overshadow the convenience. Nitrites were connected to the formation of carcinogens inside the body, and suddenly the playful push of a spray can seem far more sinister. For many families, the discovery was jarring. How could something sold as harmless fun carry such hidden danger? Grocery stores phased out the old formulas, reformulating to safer alternatives, but the damage to trust was already done. To this day, spray cheese carries a reputation as junk food, a symbol of the era when novelty came before safety. Looking back, it is impossible not to remember the laughter of kids spraying towers of cheese onto crackers, only to realize later that what seemed like innocent fun was another banned experiment in convenience. Outdoor clotheslines once stretched across nearly every backyard. In the 1970s, laundry hung in the sun was an ordinary sight, sheets flapping in the breeze, shirts clipped with wooden pins, and jeans stiffening in the sunlight. Families relied on the clothesline not just to save electricity, but also because dryers were less common or more expensive. The scent of sun-dried fabric was unmistakable, and children often played hide-and-seek among the hanging sheets. But as technology advanced, automatic dryers became the norm. By the late 20th century, clotheslines began to vanish, sometimes even banned by homeowner associations that viewed them as unsightly. Today, drying laundry outdoors is rare, though some eco-conscious families are reviving the practice. Still, the image of a backyard dotted with fluttering clothes remains a vivid memory of a simpler, slower pace of home life. With small, swallowable parts and no warnings filled toy aisles in the 1970s. Board games came with marbles, dice, and plastic pieces tiny enough to choke a toddler, yet no packaging warned of hazards. Action figures often included detachable weapons, helmets, or accessories that kids could easily put in their mouths. Parents were expected to use common sense rather than rely on printed labels. Kids traded pieces, lost them in carpets, or carried them in pockets to school. It was not unusual for a toddler to sneak a toy from an older sibling and end up with a piece lodged in their mouth. Emergency rooms saw their share of choking incidents, yet toys remained unchanged for years. Parents often laughed about close calls rather than demanding stricter safety laws. Inevitably, there were accidents, but they rarely led to sweeping changes. For children, the risk barely registered. It was just part of playtime. The lack of safety warnings reflected a broader cultural attitude: trust parents and kids to figure things out. Now every toy box is covered in age restrictions and bright caution labels, a direct response to decades of accidents. In the 1970s, though, those tiny pieces were just part of the fun, even if they occasionally led to trips to the emergency room. Original gum came with one bold promise: no stick. A claim that turned out to be as true as disco, lasting forever. It arrived in bright pink bricks, soft and chewy, with a flavor that could knock your taste buds into next week. But that sweetness lasted about 30 seconds before fading into rubbery silence. The smell alone could fill a classroom: sweet, fruity, and slightly chemical. The scent of every 1970s childhood in one inhale. The moment it hit your tongue, you were transported straight to the playground, ready to blow bubbles the size of your face. And when it inevitably popped, you'd spend the next hour scraping pink goo out of your hair and laughing about it anyway. And as for that no stick guarantee, tell that to every kid who spent a Saturday night scraping Hubba Bubba out of their hair or braces. Teachers hated it, dentists loathed it, and barbers made small fortunes cutting it out of ponytails. Still, there was something magical about unwrapping that block and blowing a bubble big enough to cover your entire face. The texture was perfect for bubble making, even if it did glue itself to everything you loved. Hubba Bubba became a playground legend, a sticky, sugary rebellion that lived on the lips and sneakers of an entire generation. It may not have kept its promise, but it gave the 1970s the biggest bubbles anyone had ever seen. Taco Doritos were the Yule log broadcasts on television were the simplest yet most comforting tradition of all. On cold winter nights, local stations would play an endless loop of a crackling fireplace, accompanied by soft carols and instrumental classics. For families without a real hearth, it gave the illusion of warmth and togetherness. The glow from the television filled the room, flickering like real firelight against tinsel and wrapping paper. People wrapped gifts, baked cookies, or just sat quietly while that gentle soundtrack played in the background. It was calm, unhurried, and deeply human, a rare moment of stillness in a noisy world. There were no commercials, no plots, no jokes, just music, fire, and peace. For many, it became a quiet ritual, proof that sometimes the simplest things carry the most meaning. Even today, replaying that humble loop can transport anyone back to a time when all you needed for Christmas was a little light and a little warmth. Toward the end of the 1970s, food science was buzzing with the promise of fat-free snacking. Enter Alestra, a fat substitute that promised all the crunch of chips without the calories. In early testing and limited releases, it looked like the future of snack food. Magazines hailed it as a miracle, and companies poured money into marketing, convinced they had cracked the code to guilt-free eating. For dieters, the idea of snacking endlessly without gaining weight sounded too good to pass up. It quickly became one of the most anticipated food experiments of the decade. Families could enjoy a bag of chips without guilt, and diet culture embraced it with open arms. But the reality was far less appetizing. Alestra caused serious stomach issues, from cramping to embarrassing digestive problems. Reports began piling up, and what was meant to be a breakthrough quickly turned into a public relations disaster. By the time it was banned, Alestra chips had already left their mark, both on grocery shelves and on the digestive tracts of those who tried them. For many, the memory is not just about chips, but about how easily hope can turn to regret. It was a lesson that shortcuts in food often come with hidden costs. Formal living rooms were once sacred spaces. In many 1970s homes, there was a special room reserved for company, a place with pristine furniture that children were forbidden to touch. Plastic covers often protected couches and chairs, ensuring they stayed spotless for the rare occasions when guests arrived. The room was a showpiece, a sign that the family maintained a certain level of formality and pride in their home. But while these rooms looked perfect, they were often devoid of life. Day-to-day family gatherings happened elsewhere, leaving the formal living room a quiet, unused monument to appearances. Over time, this approach lost its appeal. Families wanted spaces that were lived in, not just looked at. The rise of open-concept layouts in the 1990s and 2000s dissolved walls and merged kitchens, dining, and living areas into single, multifunctional hubs. Today, the idea of a room that no one uses feels wasteful, even impractical. Instead, modern homes embrace flexible family spaces where kids play, parents relax, and guests join in casually. The furniture is meant to be enjoyed, not just admired, and the focus is on comfort and connection rather than presentation. Still, for those who remember them, formal living rooms hold a certain nostalgic elegance, a reminder of a time when appearances mattered, and homes carried a kind of quiet pride that has largely vanished. Riding in the back of pickup trucks was one of the ultimate thrills of the 1970s. Kids and even adults piled into the open bed, sitting on wheel wells or dangling their legs over the edge as the truck sped down roads and highways. It was seen as harmless fun, a way to pack more people into a vehicle during summer outings, parades, or even just casual drives. No one thought about the lack of safety, and there were no laws stopping it. Children stood up to feel the rush of wind, holding onto the sides as the truck bounced over bumps. Families laughed together on hayrides or waved to neighbors during parades, treating it like a carnival ride. Even dogs joined in, tails wagging as they leaned into the breeze. For children, the wind rushing past and the feeling of freedom made it one of the most exciting rides of their lives. Parents sometimes even encouraged it, especially in rural areas where it was considered part of growing up. Today, the very idea of riding unrestrained in the open back of a truck on a freeway feels reckless and dangerous. But in the 1970s, it was a symbol of carefree childhood. Kougal-flavored peanut spread was the decade's weirdest experiment in breakfast innovation. It was peanut butter, but with added flavors like banana, cinnamon, chocolate, and vanilla. The commercials called it groovy and fun, but the reality was closer to confusing and why does my toast taste like perfume? Each flavor fought the other for attention, turning every bite into an identity crisis. The texture was oily yet gritty, sticking to the roof of your mouth like glue mixed with sugar. Parents hated it, kids loved it, and everyone's kitchen cupboard smelled faintly like regret. Kougal's bright, space-age jars promised excitement but delivered chaos. It was a product that perfectly captured the experimental spirit of the 1970s, bold, colorful, and slightly misguided. Within a few years, it vanished from stores, but the name lives on as a nostalgic punchline. Kougal wasn't just peanut butter, it was peanut butter that went too far. Snack Pack. Claymation and stop-motion television specials were more than just cartoons. They were emotional landmarks of the decade. Every December, families gathered around wood-paneled televisions to watch Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and The Year Without a Santa Claus. The jerky motion, Hand-built sets and warm narration gave these specials a charm that modern animation could never replace. Kids knew the songs by heart, and parents watched with a mix of nostalgia and comfort, remembering the same stories from their own youth. These weren't just TV shows. They were shared rituals that glued generations together. When that familiar Rankin/Bass logo appeared, the world seemed to slow down for an hour of pure holiday magic. It wasn't just about Santa or snow, it was about the feeling of belonging, the promise that kindness and faith would always win. Somehow, even with the primitive technology, they felt more alive than most things on television today. In kitchens across America, powdered drink mixes were a quick fix for thirsty kids and busy parents. Add water, stir, and you had a pitcher of brightly flavored refreshment ready to go. In the 1970s, many of these mixes used cyclamate to keep the sweetness high and the calories low. The cheerful commercials made it seem like the perfect choice for families, promising all the flavor without the guilt. Television ads showed smiling children gulping down colorful drinks, while parents were told they were making the healthy choice. The truth, hidden in the fine print, was that the sweetener was far more dangerous than anyone realized. But when cyclamate was banned over cancer concerns, these powders suddenly became part of a growing food safety scare. Companies pulled them from shelves, and parents found themselves wondering what exactly they had been serving their kids. The idea that even a simple glass of fruit punch could be dangerous was enough to shake confidence in the entire processed food industry. What was once seen as harmless family fun turned into yet another banned memory of the decade. Walls once transformed living rooms into dens of warmth, but also shadows. Dark faux wood panels lined the walls of countless suburban homes in the 1970s, creating a cozy but sometimes heavy atmosphere. Families gathered in these spaces, surrounded by walls that seemed to whisper of rustic cabins or gentlemen's clubs. The appeal was clear. Paneling was inexpensive, easy to install, and covered imperfections quickly. It brought a certain gravitas to living rooms, making them feel formal and substantial even in modest homes. But as the years passed, these walls began to feel more suffocating than stylish. The dark wood absorbed light, often leaving rooms feeling smaller and gloomier than they were. By the late 1980s and 1990s, many homeowners reached for paint, ripping down paneling or covering it with lighter tones. Today, modern living rooms lean toward airy palettes, with white, beige, or soft grays reflecting natural light. Open shelving and minimalist decor emphasize space rather than closing it in. The wood itself has not disappeared. Real wood accents and reclaimed materials are popular again, but they are used sparingly as accents, not overwhelming canvases. The heavy faux panel look of the 70s has become shorthand for retro, even kitschy design, often played for laughs in movies or remembered in old photographs. But for those who grew up in such homes, the feel of paneling under their fingers remains tied to evenings of television, family games, and a certain kind of domestic coziness. Wall field trips without permission slips seem impossible today, but back then it was a common practice. Teachers would gather the class, take a quick head count, and pile everyone onto a bus for a trip to the zoo, a museum, or even a factory tour. There were no stacks of paperwork, no emergency contact lists, and no signed forms tucked into backpacks. Kids were often surprised to find out where they were going only once the bus started moving. Some students came home covered in dirt from farms or dazzled by machinery from factory tours, retelling stories to parents who had no idea the trip even happened. The spontaneity made the day feel like an adventure, adding to the thrill. Parents often did not even know where their kids were going until the child came home with a story to tell. It was a time when trust in schools and teachers was nearly absolute, and communities felt smaller and safer. The idea of liability or lawsuits was far from people's minds, and permission was assumed rather than documented. Looking back, it feels carefree but also risky. Children traveling across town with little more than a roll call to keep track of them. Yet for many kids, these trips became some of their best memories of school. Precise bins were the ultimate snack lie of the 1970s. Crunchy spirals that claimed to deliver real pizza flavor, but mostly delivered dusty disappointment. The box promised oregano, tomato, and cheese in every bite. But what you actually got was a handful of stale swirls that tasted like old croutons. They were shaped like little spirals, fun to look at and perfect for finger food, but they smelled like someone spilled Italian seasoning on cardboard. Still, for a brief moment, kids believed they were eating something rebellious. Pizza without parental permission. It was junk food disguised as innovation, and it worked for about 5 minutes. Pizza spins became the kind of snack you begged for at the store but never finished at home. Even the marketing leaned hard into the hip 1970s vibe, pairing them with comic book ads and smiling kids pretending the flavor didn't burn their tongues. They were crunchy, sure, but not in a good way. The kind of crunch that tasted like regret. When they disappeared, no one noticed right away. But decades later, nostalgia gave them a second life as a trivia answer. Pizza spins may have flopped as a snack, but they'll always hold a place in the weird, wonderful heart of 1970s food experiments. Christmas albums by pop icons filled every home with music that defined the season. Spinning on console stereos were voices like Elvis Presley, The Carpenters, and Johnny Mathis, each bringing their own warmth to December nights. The gentle crackle of the vinyl made every song sound even cozier, like a fire in the background. Families would hum softly to "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," while the lights from the tree danced on wood-paneled walls. Teenagers flipped the records to the B-side, finding hidden gems that became their personal holiday anthems. And somewhere between the harmonies and the static, people found comfort, proof that even famous voices could make the world feel small and safe again. Families would hum along while wrapping presents or setting the table for dinner, the familiar melodies wrapping the house in comfort. These records weren't just music. They were part of the ritual. Once the needle hit the groove, the holiday officially began. Songs like "Merry Christmas, Darling" or "Blue Christmas" carried both joy and melancholy, reminding everyone that the holidays were as much about remembering as celebrating. Decades later, hearing those same voices still brings people back to those living rooms when stereo cabinets doubled as furniture and the world felt simpler. Each spin was a gentle reminder of what the season truly sounded like. Homemade popcorn and crackers. If you walked into a candy shop in the early 1970s, the rainbow on the shelves was not complete without the deep purples and violets that came from FD&C Violet No. 1. This dye made icings brighter, hard candies shinier, and gave gumdrops their striking jewel tones. For kids, the color was unforgettable. It was the taste of grape lollipops, the shade of party cakes, and the shimmer of sugar-coated jellies. Parents bought them by the bag without a second thought, happy to keep birthday parties festive and lunchboxes colorful. But behind that cheer was a dye that would soon come under fire. Studies began connecting FD&C Violet No. 1 to cancer in lab animals, raising questions that no candy lover wanted to ask. The Food and Drug Administration could no longer ignore the evidence, and what once seemed harmless became a forbidden shade overnight. Candy makers scrambled to reformulate, but the absence of that rich purple was noticed immediately by children and adults alike. The joy of a grape candy suddenly felt a little dimmer, and many who grew up with those treats still recall the exact look of that vanished violet. It was a reminder that even something as innocent as a color could hide a danger. Today, candy still comes in every shade imaginable, but for those who remember, the loss of Violet No. 1 is tied to a time when the brightest parts of childhood became a little darker. Sunken living rooms captured the imagination of 1970s homeowners. Known as conversation pits, these spaces dropped a few steps below the rest of the floor, creating intimate areas for gathering. They were stylish, chic, and instantly recognizable as a sign of modern architecture. Friends lounged on built-in couches, drinks in hand, while the lowered floor encouraged closeness and conversation. The look was futuristic, a playful departure from traditional flat layouts. But in practice, sunken living rooms came with problems. They broke up floor plans, made cleaning difficult, and created tripping hazards. As design shifted toward open-concept living, the pits began to feel more like obstacles than features. By the 1990s, most were being filled in to level the floors. Today, the open, seamless flow of living spaces has replaced the novelty of conversation pits. Yet the memory of them carries a certain glamour, recalling a time when home design embraced bold experiments and sought to reinvent the way people interacted. For those who remember stepping down into one, the sunken living room will always feel like an emblem of a daring design era that came and went in just a few decades. Asbestos insulation in houses and schools was once hailed as a miracle material. Fireproof, cheap, and easy to install, it was used in walls, ceilings, and floor tiles across America. Schools were filled with it, and homes relied on it for insulation. No one questioned its safety. In fact, it was praised for protecting against fires. Kids sat in classrooms surrounded by asbestos panels, completely unaware of the danger. Maintenance workers handled it daily, stirring up dust that would later prove deadly. The risks were invisible, and that made them more insidious. By the time warnings became widespread, millions had been exposed. Today, asbestos removal is a costly and carefully regulated process, but in the 1970s, it was simply part of construction. What was once seen as progress is now remembered as one of the most hazardous building practices in modern history. Fruit Brute cereal was the odd one out in the monster cereal family, the red-headed stepchild of Count Chocula and Frankenberry. With its artificial cherry flavor and marshmallows that turned milk into a pink swamp, it was more horror than breakfast. Kids wanted to love it. After all, it had a cartoon werewolf on the box. But one spoonful told a different story. The cereal bits were crunchy at first, but quickly dissolved into mush, while the cherry taste clung to your mouth like cough syrup. Parents hated the sugar content, but kids loved the chaos of neon milk and monster mascots. It was a cereal that looked fun, but tasted like regret. Even though it didn't last long, Fruit Brute gained cult status among collectors and horror fans who remembered the box more fondly than the flavor. Its limited run made it a time capsule of 1970s cereal madness when every brand tried to out-weird the other. If you ever wonder why nostalgia tastes better than reality, just remember, Fruit Brute was proof that some monsters belong in the cereal aisle's graveyard. Fruitcake was the one holiday guest nobody could escape. Dense, dark, and soaked in rum or brandy, it sat proudly on dessert tables across America. Some people loved it, others dreaded it, but everyone recognized it as part of Christmas itself. Packed with candied fruit, nuts, and spice, the fruitcake symbolized abundance, even if it wasn't exactly anyone's first choice for dessert. Its origins stretched back generations, making it a reminder of old-world traditions and simpler times. Grandmothers swore by their recipes, often baked weeks in advance and wrapped in foil like treasure. Giving or receiving a fruitcake was a sign of thoughtfulness, even if it became the subject of family jokes. It might have been heavy, overly sweet, and hard to slice, but it represented care, time, and tradition. People may have laughed about it, but they still served it every year. Maybe that is the magic of the fruitcake. It outlasts trends, diets, and even taste. In its stubbornness, it holds the memory of countless Christmases past, each slice a piece of history sweetened with nostalgia. It might sound unbelievable today, but many cans on supermarket shelves in the 1970s were actually sealed with lead solder. That means the metal holding the can together could leach dangerous particles right into the food you were about to eat. Beans, soups, fruits, vegetables, almost anything in a can carried that silent risk. Families opened those cans without hesitation, pouring dinner straight into pots or onto plates, never guessing the hidden hazard built right into the container itself. At the time, it was cheaper and easier for manufacturers to use lead in the sealing process, and no one questioned it. Slowly, science began catching up. Doctors started to connect the dots between mysterious health issues and the everyday products people used without question. The idea that the same cans you relied on to stretch a budget could be poisoning you from the inside out was a terrifying realization. By the late 1970s, regulations began tightening, and eventually, lead solder in canned goods was fully banned. It is chilling to look back and realize how close to danger everyday families really were. Rotary phones mounted on kitchen walls were the lifeline of the household. With their long, coiled cords, these phones allowed parents to stir a pot of soup while cradling the receiver against their shoulder, or children to twirl absent-mindedly as they called friends. The rotary dial clicked rhythmically with each number, a sound that defined communication for decades. Mounted high on the wall, the phone was a shared tool, never private, and conversations often unfolded with family members listening in nearby. It anchored the kitchen as both a cooking space and a hub of connection. But technology moved quickly, and rotary phones gave way to push-button models, then cordless handsets, and eventually sleek cell phones that fit in a pocket. Today, the idea of standing tethered to a wall while making a call feels almost absurd. Modern kitchens no longer build space for landline phones, and communication happens instantly through handheld devices. Yet the memory of a wall-mounted rotary phone, its cord stretching across the kitchen as someone leaned against the counter, still lingers as a symbol of shared family life and the slower pace of communication in the 1970s. Alone. Airline smoking sections were not just allowed in the 1950s, they were expected. Planes had ashtrays built into armrests, and passengers lit up mid-flight as if they were sitting in a diner. Families with children sat only a row or two away, with no barriers to stop the smoke from drifting everywhere. At the time, smoking was so ingrained in American culture that banning it would have seemed unimaginable. Flight attendants passed out matches and sometimes even complimentary packs of cigarettes, adding to the surreal image of a cabin filled with smoke at 30,000 feet. Travelers accepted the haze as part of the experience, and the lingering smell of tobacco clung to clothes and luggage long after landing. By the 1980s, however, the dangers of secondhand smoke could no longer be ignored, and bans were gradually put in place. Today, the idea of sparking a cigarette on a crowded flight is absurd and heavily penalized. But in the 1950s, the smoking section was a symbol of modern convenience and freedom, not a health hazard. Looking back, it is astonishing how quickly norms shifted. What was once a routine part of travel is now remembered as a shocking relic of a different era, a time when passengers puffed away in tight cabins without thinking twice. Bright itself was already a showstopper. Plug it in, stick colored pegs into a black screen, and watch your artwork light up. But here is the kicker. Most kids only had the basic set. Rich kids had the extra refill packs. That meant more templates, more colors, more options. Unicorns, rocket ships, zoo animals, you name it. The refill packs were not cheap. You had to buy them separately, and once they were used, that was it. No do-overs. They had enough pegs to make a Lite-brite zoo, a Lite-brite city, a Lite-brite universe. Their templates were rotated weekly, like gallery installations. Meanwhile, your set still had 2 missing red pegs and a sun that was mostly blue. So most of us rationed them like gold. 1 template per month maybe. But if your family had money, you went through them like printer paper. You would visit a friend's house and see 10 finished Lite-brite templates pinned to their bedroom wall, full gallery mode. And meanwhile, yours still had that same flower pattern you made 6 months ago. But even if you did not have the extras, you still loved the idea. There was something special about watching your design light up in the dark, even if it was the same one every time. Bubble lights on Christmas trees were one of those small wonders that turned a living room into pure magic. Each glass vial filled with colorful liquid would begin to bubble as soon as the heat from the light warmed it up. Kids would kneel by the tree, mesmerized by the gentle movement, watching the bubbles rise like tiny spirits trapped in glass. It was hypnotic, almost alive, and somehow more joyful than any blinking modern light could ever be. Parents would warn not to touch them. They were hot and fragile. But every kid eventually did, just to feel how real the magic seemed. The soft glow of red, green, and gold reflected against ornaments and tinsel, filling the room with warmth that went beyond electricity. It was the perfect marriage of science and Christmas wonder, a tiny chemistry experiment wrapped in nostalgia. The sound of Bing Crosby crooning from the stereo and the quiet bubbling on the tree created a calm that families still remember decades later. These lights weren't just decorations. They were living memories in glass, flickering and bubbling with the heartbeat of the season. Long before LED strands and color-changing bulbs, this was how the holidays looked and felt, bright, curious, and just a little enchanted. The regular Lincoln logs were already something special. Those smooth, notched pieces of wood that clicked together into cabins and forts, every kid loved them. But the giant Frontier set? That was a whole different league. This thing came in a massive box, filled to the brim with hundreds of logs, roofs, chimneys, and all the accessories needed to build your own village. Not just a cabin, a settlement. And rich kids had them all. They would dump the whole set onto their clean playroom floor and start building like pioneers with a trust fund. The rest of us maybe had a small tin with a dozen pieces that barely made a fence. But the giant Frontier set? You could make entire battle scenes. It had extra long logs, green roof slats, plastic figures, even little horses and wagons. These were not just toys. They were a historical reenactment in your living room. The box said, ages 4 and up. But you needed a good 15 feet of floor space just to use the whole set properly. Rich kids would invite you over, let you build one wall, then take over. It was always their fort, their rules. And even though you told yourself it was just wood, it still felt like they had more imagination just because they could build more. That is what these sets did. They made creativity feel like something you had to buy in bulk. Mirrored closet doors gleamed in bedrooms of the 1970s. Sliding panels of reflective glass made rooms feel larger and added a sense of glamour. They offered both function and style, allowing homeowners to check outfits while keeping clothes tucked neatly away. For many teenagers, these mirrors became canvases for taped posters or practice spaces for dance moves. They reflected more than just appearances. They reflected the culture of the time, one that embraced bold decor and a touch of flash. Yet the mirrors also showed smudges, fingerprints, and scratches, making upkeep difficult. By the 1990s, they fell out of fashion, replaced by wood doors, barn-style sliders, or frosted glass panels. Today, homeowners prefer designs that blend into the room rather than dominate it. Mirrored doors now often feel dated, instantly marking a home as a product of a past era. Still, their shimmering presence evokes memories of bedrooms where children played, teenagers prepared for school dances, and families embraced the mirrored glamour of the 1970s. Dining rooms once served as because in 1969, Pan American Airlines launched a waiting list for commercial flights to the moon. No joke. People were lining up to get their names on this list. The idea was simple. We made it to the moon, so the next logical step was to sell tickets. Over 90,000 people signed up, excited about the idea of sipping martinis in zero gravity and watching the Earth rise outside their window. And Pan Am treated it like a real thing. They issued membership cards, called it the First Moon Flights Club, and promised that when the day came, they would call. The only problem? There was no plan, no actual timeline, no spaceship. It was a publicity stunt that spiraled out of control. People bought into the dream hard, and Pan Am was not about to correct them. When the company went bankrupt in the 1980s, it had never even started building anything to take people to space. The dream fizzled out, but it proved just how hungry the world was for a taste of the future. And nowhere was that hunger more obvious than in people's homes, where they tried to bring cinema magic to life with a machine the size of a small refrigerator. Pastries that walked so Pop-Tarts could run. They looked promising in their foil packs, thin rectangles of pastry filled with fruit jam and drizzled with icing. But the dream ended the second they hit your mouth. The crust was dry enough to start a fire, and the filling had the consistency of lava-flavored glue. The smell out of the toaster was incredible, all warm fruit and buttered sugar, tricking you into thinking something wonderful was coming. Then came the bite, flaky on the outside, scorching on the inside, pure betrayal all the way through. The icing looked elegant, but it vanished into nothing after a single chew. If you toasted them too little, they were stiff as cardboard. Too long, and they turned into edible roof shingles. The fruit inside wasn't really fruit. It was a runny, red mystery that tasted like sugar pretending to be strawberries. Even the icing melted into a dull, sticky smear. The commercials bragged about real bakery taste, but no bakery would claim ownership of these disasters. Parents kept buying them because they were cheap, and kids kept eating them because the alternative was oatmeal. Then came Pop-Tarts, shinier, tastier, and actually edible. Overnight, Danish go-rounds were toast. Still, they deserve credit for trying. If not for flavor, then for proving that breakfast could be as convenient as it was disappointing. Stringing big bulb. C9 lights on the house was a winter ritual that turned entire neighborhoods into glowing wonderlands. These oversized, colorful bulbs were heavy, hot to the touch, and notoriously finicky. But when they lit up, they were breathtaking. Dads would climb icy ladders, stringing them across eaves and around porches, while kids shouted directions from below. Every year, there was at least one broken bulb and one argument about which color should go where, but no one cared once the switch was flipped. Neighbors competed quietly to see whose house shone brightest, creating an unspoken bond through light. And when the first snow fell, those glowing bulbs reflected off the white drifts, making the whole street look like a postcard brought to life. The smell of cold air and electric warmth filled the night as each bulb blinked to life. Those lights gave every home a sense of pride, as if to say, "We made it through another year." Even when one burned out and ruined the whole strand, no one minded too much. It was part of the process. The glow of red, green, blue, and amber bulbs on a snowy night made even the simplest house feel magical. Today's LEDs might be easier, but they can't match that warm, nostalgic glow that once lit up entire childhoods. Chewing gum in the 1970s was more than a treat. It was a lifestyle. Kids chewed it in school, teenagers popped it at drive-ins, and adults used it to freshen breath on the go. When sodium cyclamate entered the scene, gum makers saw their chance to dominate the sugar-free market. Packs of gum boasted fewer calories and dentist-approved smiles, and suddenly it seemed like everyone was chewing without the guilt. The flavor lasted longer, the stickiness felt modern, and the trend spread quickly. But when cancer concerns hit cyclamate, gum was not spared. Shelves that once carried endless rows of colorful packs suddenly lost entire product lines. Children who had grown used to blowing bubbles with their favorite slim gum found it gone without warning. Parents who trusted the sugar-free promise felt betrayed. Even more unsettling was the thought of how many sticks had been chewed before the risks were known. It was not just about losing gum, it was about losing trust in the idea that new meant better. Gum remains popular today, but the memory of those banned sticks lingers as a reminder that even the simplest habits can carry hidden costs. Once stood heavy with encyclopedias, stretching across living rooms and studies. In the 1970s, owning a full set of encyclopedias was a mark of pride, a symbol of knowledge and aspiration. Parents purchased volumes on installment plans, filling shelves with glossy books that promised answers to every question. Children flipped through them for school projects, tracing maps and studying illustrations long before the internet existed. Encyclopedias were the Google of their time, weighty and authoritative. But as technology advanced, their relevance dwindled. By the 1990s, CD-ROM encyclopedias replaced them, and by the 2000s, the internet made them obsolete entirely. Today, bookshelves are more likely to hold novels, decor, or digital devices. Google now lives in the palm of every hand, offering more information than any printed set ever could. Yet, the sight of an old encyclopedia set still sparks nostalgia, recalling evenings spent flipping pages, the smell of ink and paper, and the belief that knowledge could be neatly bound in volumes lining a wall. Keeping kids home alone as latchkey children was an accepted reality in the 1970s. Parents worked long hours, and childcare options were limited, so kids often came home from school to empty houses. They wore house keys around their necks, let themselves in, and made snacks until parents arrived later in the evening. Television became a babysitter, and frozen dinners filled the gap when kids cooked for themselves. It was not considered neglect, It was simply what families did to make ends meet. Communities trusted that children were responsible enough to handle it, and parents expected independence from a young age. Today, child welfare guidelines and laws would view this very differently, but at the time it was part of growing up. Being a latchkey kid carried a mix of pride and loneliness, teaching responsibility while also reminding kids how much times have changed. Cars without child safety seats were another everyday norm. Infants often rode on a parent's lap, and toddlers bounced around freely, and ice cream sandwiches were nothing short of revolutionary when they hit the shelves. Ice cream wedged between two chocolate chip cookies, then rolled in chocolate chips for good measure. For kids, it was like discovering the holy grail of frozen treats. The commercials promised a handheld dessert that was fun, indulgent, and portable. But reality was a little messier. The moment you picked one up, the ice cream began its slow, inevitable melt, turning your hands into sticky chocolate swamps. The cookies were frozen solid, hard enough to crack a tooth, until the second they thawed, when they instantly fell apart. Eating one required strategy, timing, and several napkins. Still, the taste made it worth every smear and drip. The sweetness of the cookies, the cold ice cream, and the crunch of chocolate chips blended into pure summer bliss. They were the crown jewels of the neighborhood ice cream truck, a dollar well spent and a memory worth every stain. Parents hated the cleanup, but kids didn't care. The chaos was part of the charm. Chipwiches eventually returned in the 2000s, but nothing could match that first bite from a 1970s original, eaten too fast on a hot day before it melted completely. Chipwich wasn't just dessert, it was an event, one you wore on your face long after it was gone. Vienna socials were where friendships formed, crushes blossomed, and fashion collided with fluorescent lighting. Every weekend, kids flocked to the local rink like it was the hottest club in town. You laced up rental skates that never quite fit, wobbled onto the floor, and tried not to fall in front of your classmates. The music blared, everything from Madonna to Michael Jackson, and the lights spun in pinks, blues, and greens. Couples held hands during the slow skate. Kids showed off their best moves during the speed rounds. And when you got tired, you grabbed a slice of cardboard-flavored pizza or a snow cone that turned your tongue electric blue. The carpet was hideous, the lockers never worked, but the vibe? Unbeatable. Roller rinks were more than entertainment. They were a rite of passage. You had your first dance there, your first bruise, maybe even your first kiss, awkward and giggly behind the concession stand. Parents watched from the sidelines or dropped you off with a reminder to call from the payphone. The rink was loud, sticky, and chaotic, and yet it was magic. Even now, the smell of rental skates and popcorn grease brings it all back in one wheeled rush. Boxed gelatin mix, store brand, no frills, was the dessert you made when there was not enough for anything else. It cost pennies, took only water, and could sit in the fridge for days without going bad. Red, orange, lime green, it all tasted mostly the same. But that did not matter. It was cold, wiggly, sweet, and strangely satisfying. You poured it into mismatched bowls, let it set, and waited for that first satisfying spoonful. It was something you could offer guests and still feel like a good host. It filled space at birthday parties, potlucks, and school lunches. You could stretch it with canned fruit or whipped topping, turn it into a salad if you wanted to get fancy, or just eat it straight. Sometimes you made it just because you needed to feel like something was under control. It set slowly in the fridge, and for a few hours, you had something to look forward to. Gelatin mix did not impress anyone, but it held its place. Colorful, sweet, and just enough to count as dessert. The hand crank egg beater was a rite of passage. Long before mixers plugged into walls, children stood on stools beside their mothers, gripping the cool metal handle and turning the crank with both hands. The beaters would spin in a blur, blending sugar, eggs, and flour into the thick beginnings of birthday cakes and pancake batter. It was not efficient, but it was intimate. You felt the recipe coming together. Your arms grew sore, but your heart grew full. The egg beater did not make noise. It did not break. It did not ask for anything but effort. Every kitchen had one. usually tucked in a drawer next to the wooden spoons and measuring cups. Its clinking metal gears were as familiar as the smell of vanilla extract. And somehow, everything tasted better when it had been beaten by hand. Then came stand mixers, food processors, and digital timers. The crank beater was cast aside as outdated, inconvenient, old. But in that loss, something human disappeared. Now it hangs on antique shop walls, a symbol of effort, patience, and care. It taught us that food was not just made, it was earned. Why did we stop believing that some things are better when you feel them in your bones? Lawn chemicals with few restrictions were sold everywhere in the 1970s. Homeowners sprayed pesticides and herbicides across yards, often with children and pets nearby. Bright green lawns were a source of pride, and no one thought twice about the risks of chemical exposure. Many families saw a flawless lawn as a symbol of respectability, more important than any hidden risks. Kids would roll down hills coated in chemicals, their hands stained green by grass and residue. Even pets drank from puddles on freshly sprayed yards without anyone stopping them. Bags of fertilizer and weed killer came with little more than vague instructions, and protective gear was rarely used. Kids played tag on freshly treated grass, rolled in it, and sometimes even helped parents spread pellets. The cultural push for perfect lawns outweighed concerns about health or safety. Only years later did studies link many of these products to long-term health issues. Today, warnings, restrictions, and organic alternatives are common, but in the 1970s, it was all about appearance. Families remember the smell of fresh chemicals mixing with cut grass, a sensory detail now tinged with unease. Were the schoolyard obsession that made fun of everything adults took seriously. Kids lined up at corner stores to buy packs filled with parodies of real products, like Crust toothpaste or Band-Aid bandages, and a rock-hard stick of gum that tasted like cardboard dipped in sugar. The gum cracked, splintered, and dissolved faster than your allowance, but no one cared. Kids traded the stickers like baseball cards, arguing over which designs were the funniest or grossest. The satire hit a sweet spot between silly and subversive, making kids feel clever for getting the joke. Parents thought they were nonsense, which only made them more desirable. The stickers were the real prize, gross, clever, and just the right amount of rebellious. Kids stuck them on lunchboxes, notebooks, and their parents' walls, sparking decades of arguments and laughter. Each pack cost just a few cents, but collecting them became a lifelong mission for 1970s kids who loved mischief. They captured the weird humor of the decade perfectly, sarcastic, bold, and unapologetically fun. The gum may have been a dental hazard, but wacky packages were proof that kids didn't need sugar to get addicted, just satire, imagination, and a good sticker. Potato skins. Solar wheel lights for trees brought a futuristic glow to holiday living rooms. Instead of stringing lights, families would set up a small metal wheel beside their aluminum or tinsel tree. As it spun, its translucent panels cast rotating shades of red, blue, green, and gold across the branches, transforming the room into something straight out of a science fiction dream. Kids would sit cross-legged on shag carpets, watching the colors shift and blend, as if the tree itself were breathing. The low hum of the motor added to the trance-like calm of it all. No other decoration captured the spirit of 1970s Christmas quite like this. A perfect blend of technology, imagination, and style. Parents loved it because it was easy, but the real joy came from how alive it made the room feel. The lights reflected on tinsel ornaments, on wrapping paper, even in the glass of framed family photos, painting everything in waves of color. It was simple, yes, but mesmerizing. Every few seconds, the scene changed. Gold to green, red to blue, like the tree was alive with emotion. Decades later, when people think of Christmases past, that slow spinning glow still plays in their minds like an old film reel, softly lighting up everything that mattered most. In the 1970s, grocery shelves were stacked with sodas in every flavor and color imaginable. Tropical Fantasy Soda promised something different: bold flavors, bright dyes, and prices so low that anyone could afford them. For working-class families, it became a favorite, a way to enjoy a sweet treat without breaking the budget. Kids loved the vibrant colors, from neon orange to electric green, and parents welcomed a drink that kept everyone happy for pennies. But those colors came at a cost. The early formulas of tropical fantasy used dyes that were later deemed unsafe. Rumors began to spread about side effects, and soon the soda's reputation was in free fall. Some stories were exaggerated, even bizarre, but the core issue was real. The dyes had no business in food. Regulators stepped in, forcing the company to reformulate. The soda survived in name, but the taste and appearance changed forever. For many who grew up drinking it, the ban felt like losing a piece of their youth. Tropical fantasy became less about refreshment and more about controversy, a symbol of how quickly cheap could turn dangerous. It is remembered today not just for its price, but for the uneasy truth hidden in every bottle. Oversized entertainment cabinets once dominated living rooms. These massive pieces of furniture were designed to house stereo systems, record players, speakers, and stacks of vinyl records. They were often made of dark wood, polished to a shine, and took up entire walls. Families gathered around them, sliding open cabinet doors to reveal the turntable or to select a record for the evening. The ritual of playing music was tied to these bulky units, which carried a sense of pride and modern sophistication. They were both functional and decorative, anchoring social spaces much like fireplaces once did. But as technology shrank, the need for such furniture faded. Cassette players, CD players, and eventually digital devices reduced entire systems to pocket-sized gadgets. Today, streaming services on phones and Bluetooth speakers have eliminated the need for large cabinets entirely. Entertainment furniture has shifted toward minimal consoles that hold slim televisions, with storage limited to a few shelves. The oversized stereo cabinet now belongs to the past, remembered as a monument to a time when music was physical, heavy, and central to the rhythm of family life. Honestly, because of that freedom. Drinking and driving viewed casually is perhaps one of the most jarring shifts from the 1970s to now. The phrase "one for the road" was not just a joke, it was an accepted practice. Many cars had built-in ashtrays and even cup holders designed with beer cans in mind. People drove home from bars with open containers in the passenger seat, and no one batted an eye. It was common to see beer cans rolling under seats or tucked in glove compartments, evidence of how normal it was. Even passengers joined in, sipping drinks on highways as if it were no different from having a soda. Roadside checks were rare, and the culture itself downplayed the risks. Police were far less strict, and DUI laws were weakly enforced compared to today. It was not unusual to see someone sip from a can of beer while cruising down the highway. The cultural mindset was shockingly relaxed about the dangers, partly because campaigns about drunk driving had not yet taken hold. Families sometimes even joked about dad having a few too many, but still driving home. Tragic accidents eventually led to tougher laws and greater awareness, but in the 1970s, casual drinking and driving was simply part of the culture. Marathon Bar was the king of 1970s candy, 8 glorious inches of chewy caramel covered in thick milk chocolate and twisted into a long, rope-like braid. It was the kind of candy bar that dared you to finish it before your jaw gave up. The wrapper screamed confidence, with bold red lettering and a ruler printed across the front as if to brag about its length. For kids, it was pure magic, a treat that lasted longer than Saturday morning cartoons. The caramel stretched endlessly, pulling into golden ribbons that stuck to your teeth and refused to let go. Parents complained it was too messy, but that was part of the fun. The longer you chewed, the more victory it felt like. Every kid who bought one felt like they had conquered a snack meant for grown-ups. Unfortunately, that size came at a price. It melted in heat, stuck to the wrapper, and was nearly impossible to eat neatly. Still, the Marathon Bar became a symbol of 1970s indulgence. Oversized, sweet, and just a little ridiculous. When it disappeared in the 1980s, it left behind sticky memories of a time when candy wasn't just eaten. It was an adventure. Space Foods and JCPenney Christmas catalogs, better known as the Wish Books, were the highlight of every holiday season. Long before online shopping, kids would lie belly down on the living room carpet, circling their dream toys in red crayon while parents quietly made notes on the other pages. It was more than a catalog. It was a gateway to imagination, a tradition that turned every home into a small department store of hope. You could almost smell the glossy pages and the faint ink that carried the promise of Christmas morning. Parents might not have been able to buy everything, but flipping through those pages together made the dream feel real enough. The anticipation that came from waiting weeks, sometimes months, for that special toy to appear under the tree was half the fun. For many families, the arrival of that thick catalog in the mail meant Christmas had officially begun. It was the season's first miracle, delivered right to your doorstep. They seemed like the perfect treat, a hollow chocolate egg with a toy hidden inside. For kids in the 1970s, it felt like opening two presents at once, a sweet snack and a surprise you could play with after. Kinder. Surprise eggs came from Europe, but quickly found curious fans in the United States. Parents saw them as harmless fun, and children begged for them at every grocery trip. The problem was buried inside that chocolate shell. The small plastic toys were a choking hazard, and reports of accidents sent regulators into action. Suddenly, what once felt like magic was now a banned item in American stores, though it continued overseas without interruption. It left many American kids with a sense of missing out, especially when friends or relatives from abroad brought them back in suitcases. For those who tasted one before the ban, the memory is bittersweet, a symbol of childhood joy that was taken away almost as quickly as it appeared. How could something so simple be both delightful and dangerous at the same time? Few television consoles were more than electronics. They were furniture. In the 1970s, the television was encased in bulky wood cabinets that doubled as centerpieces of the living room. Families arranged couches and chairs around these massive sets, treating them like fireplaces of the modern age. The console itself often featured shelves, decorative carvings, and sometimes even built-in speakers. Watching television was not just entertainment. It was ritual, gathering everyone in one place. But as technology advanced, the size of the television shrank while the size of the screen grew. By the 2000s, flat screens mounted on walls or placed on slim stands replaced the heavy wood cabinets. Today, televisions can vanish entirely into minimalist decor, blending into walls or even transforming into digital art frames. The bulky console, once so central, now feels excessive and clunky. Yet it carried a kind of charm, an era when the television was not just a device, but part of the home itself. Looking back, those wood-framed consoles evoke images of families sitting close, adjusting rabbit ear antennas, and tuning in to shared moments that defined an age before screens became portable and personal. Paint still in homes and toys was one of the hidden dangers of the 1970s. Bright colors coated walls, cribs, and even children's blocks, with no awareness of the long-term risks. Parents proudly painted nurseries in cheerful hues, never realizing the paint chips could be toxic. Kids chewed on windowsills or toy edges without anyone suspecting harm. Lead made paint more durable and vibrant, which is why it was everywhere, in kitchens, schools, and playrooms. Children often scraped walls with toys, breaking off paint chips and putting them in their mouths out of curiosity. Parents swept up the flakes without worrying, treating it like harmless dust. The cheerful colors that brightened homes hid one of the most serious dangers of the decade. It was so common that no one thought twice about it. Later, studies revealed its devastating effects on children's health, especially on brain development. By the end of the decade, regulations began phasing it out, but in the early 1970s, it was still standard. Families now look back in shock, realizing how normal it was to grow up surrounded by something we now consider poison: planters. Cheese balls were bright orange, perfectly round, and unapologetically artificial, the ultimate party snack of the 1970s. They came in tall blue cans that popped open with a puff of cheese-scented air strong enough to clear the room. The first handful was heaven, light, crunchy, and salty in all the right ways. By the second handful, though, your fingers were glowing orange, your face shiny, and your dignity gone. Every couch cushion, remote, and phone cord bore the evidence of your addiction. It was cheese dust that claimed everything it touched. Parents bought them for gatherings, kids devoured them during television marathons, and nobody could stop once they started. The taste was unmistakable. That tangy, fake cheddar goodness that coated your mouth for hours. Planters' cheese balls were chaos in a can, a snack that didn't pretend to be healthy or classy. When they disappeared, fans protested for decades until Planters finally brought them back, proving that sometimes you really can't improve on bright orange perfection. Peanut butter boppers were holiday punch bowls, and cheese balls were the twin stars of every grown-up Christmas party. The punch was a fizzy, sherbet-colored miracle, usually made with ginger ale, pineapple juice, and rainbow scoops of lime or raspberry sherbet melting into a sweet swirl. Its scent alone could tell you it was Christmas night. Beside it sat the legendary cheese ball, glistening under crushed nuts and surrounded by stacks of Ritz crackers like edible gold coins. Guests hovered near the snack table, chatting and laughing, their reflections dancing in silver tinsel and mirrored ornaments. The sound of clinking cups mixed with laughter and muffled Christmas records spinning in the background. Kids would sneak sips of punch, their faces lighting up at the sugary fizz, while adults swapped recipes and stories. Every bite of that creamy, tangy cheese ball carried comfort and nostalgia, proof that you didn't need luxury to feel festive. These simple spreads turned modest living rooms into elegant celebrations. No one needed champagne or fancy hors d'oeuvres. All it took was a good punch bowl, a perfect cheese ball, and a house filled with laughter. Even today, one taste of that sherbet sweetness or a bite of that smoky cheese brings the 1970s Christmas spirit rushing right back. Apples that gleamed like glass, cucumbers that shined like plastic. This was not nature's work, but the result of coatings like polyvinyl alcohol. Supermarkets in the 1970s embraced the practice, believing shoppers wanted produce that looked flawless. The waxy coating sealed in moisture, extended shelf life, and gave fruits and vegetables an appealing glow. For grocers, it was a dream solution. Less spoilage meant less waste and more profit. Shoppers often associated shine with freshness, so sales actually went up when the coatings were used. Almost no one stopped to ask what that shine was really made of. Families bought them without question, believing shiny meant fresh. But regulators soon realized that ingesting polyvinyl alcohol coatings carried risks no one had considered. Bans were put in place, forcing stores to rethink how produce should look. For consumers, the shift was noticeable. Fruits no longer sparkled quite the same, and the grocery aisle lost a bit of its manufactured perfection. Yet the loss was also a gain. Produce that was safer, even if less glamorous. Looking back, it is almost eerie to think how easily we accepted food that had been literally painted to shine. Linoleum floors once defined kitchens and bathrooms across America. Bright colors, geometric patterns, and faux tile designs sprawled across homes in the 1970s, turning floors into bold statements. Linoleum was affordable, durable, and easy to clean, making it a practical solution for families with busy households. Children spilled juice or tracked mud, and the floor was quickly wiped down without worry. The patterns were sometimes dizzying, swirls of orange, green, or yellow that seemed almost too lively. But they gave homes a cheerful energy. Families accepted the trade-off of bold style for practical utility. Yet as design preferences evolved, linoleum lost its charm. By the late 20th century, homeowners turned to ceramic tile, stone, or hardwood for more timeless elegance. Today, waterproof laminate and luxury vinyl planks dominate, offering durability without the loud patterns. Modern kitchens favor subtle tones that let cabinets and countertops shine. The bold linoleum floors of the past now feel like artifacts, but for those who lived with them, they remain tied to the sound of footsteps running through kitchens and the sight of sunlight bouncing off colorful patterns every morning. Cars without seatbelts for everyone were the norm in the 1970s. Many vehicles only had lap belts in the front seats, while back seats often had no restraints at all. Children piled into station wagons, sitting on the floor, in trunks, or even stretched out across the back bench seat. Families went on road trips with kids rolling around freely, playing games, or lying down for naps. Some kids even rode with their heads sticking out of windows or sat facing backward, waving at drivers behind them. Others built pillow forts in the back during long drives, completely unbuckled. It was a mix of chaos and freedom that defined family car travel. Parents did not worry about safety harnesses or buckles because the expectation simply was not there. Seat belts were considered optional at best, and many drivers tucked them behind seats so they would not wrinkle clothes. Campaigns like "Buckle Up for Safety" had only just begun, and it would be decades before seatbelt laws became standard nationwide. Looking back, the thought of driving at highway speeds with an entire family unrestrained is terrifying, but at the time it was just how things were done. Rennet ice cream loaf was elegance frozen in time. The dessert that made every 1970s family feel like they had just stepped into a European cafe. It wasn't just ice cream, it was art. Thin, delicate layers of vanilla and chocolate folded into one another like edible lace, all stacked into a wavy masterpiece. The commercials were pure drama, close-ups of spoons breaking through glossy chocolate sheets as orchestral music played in the background. In reality, it was just ice cream, but it looked expensive, and that was enough. Families saved it for special occasions, serving slices like it was fine pastry. The texture was smooth, creamy, and perfectly portioned, a rare moment when something looked as good as it tasted. But the real luxury came from presentation. Pulling a Viennetta out of your freezer in front of guests instantly raised your social status by at least 2 points. It was the dessert that made every suburban dinner party feel like an event, a sweet illusion of sophistication in loaf form. Even decades later, the name Viennetta still carries a kind of quiet nostalgia, a reminder of when dessert could make you feel fancy, even if you were still sitting at a plastic-covered dining table. For a generation of dreamers, Viennetta was elegance you could serve with a spoon. Soy Vic Cocoa stops were the soul of community Christmases in the 70s. Bundled in scarves and mittens, groups of kids roamed the neighborhood streets, their voices echoing through the cold night air. Porch lights flickered on as families peeked out to listen, smiling as the familiar melodies drifted across the snow. There was a kind of bravery in singing to strangers, but the reward was always worth it. Cups of steaming cocoa, homemade cookies, or sometimes a few coins for the local church drive. Parents followed behind or waited by windows, proud of the small-town spirit that seemed to warm even the chilliest nights. Every verse of Silent Night or Joy to the World carried not just a tune, but a message of kindness, togetherness, and the kind of generosity that didn't need to be bought. The laughter between songs, the crunch of boots on snow, and the foggy breath in the air all felt like pieces of something bigger. By the time the group returned home, cheeks flushed and hands cold, they carried more than empty cocoa cups. They carried the feeling of being part of something joyful and pure. Classic toy craze. The 1970s were a time when the shine on supermarket fruits and vegetables did not just come from nature, it often came from pesticides like orthocyclo. Farmers sprayed it widely, believing it was the best way to keep crops pest-free and plentiful. Shoppers never suspected the crisp apples, leafy greens, or tomatoes carried residues of chemicals meant for insects, not people. At first, these sprays were praised in magazines and even promoted as helping America feed more families for less money. Home cooks proudly served these picture-perfect vegetables, never imagining the chemicals stayed behind long after the bugs were gone. It took years of research and advocacy before the truth began to outweigh the marketing. For families, the produce looked perfect, and that was enough. But when regulators began studying the long-term effects, the picture turned grim. Health risks, contamination, and environmental damage became linked to pesticides that once seemed essential. The ban came quickly, but the trust took years to rebuild. For many who grew up then, the memory of glossy fruit in the produce aisle is bittersweet. It was affordable, abundant, and colorful, yet hiding dangers no one wanted to see. It is sobering to realize that the healthiest foods in the basket were sometimes the most compromised. Shiny aluminum storm doors once gleamed at the entrances of suburban homes. They were practical, providing airflow during warmer months while protecting the main wooden door from weather. With their glass panels and metallic frames, they became almost universal by the 1970s. Families opened them in summer to let breezes drift through screen inserts, while children pressed their faces against the glass during colder months. But their shine came with drawbacks. Metal frames dented, screens tore, and glass panes rattled in the wind. Over the decades, homeowners began replacing them with sleeker, energy-efficient designs that matched modern architecture. Today, storm doors are slimmer, better insulated, and often feature retractable screens or tinted glass. The once flashy aluminum designs are now seen as dated, reminders of a different aesthetic. Still, the sound of a metal storm door clanging shut remains instantly recognizable to anyone who grew up in a 1970s neighborhood. Selling cigarettes to teenagers in vending machines was shockingly normal. These machines were everywhere, in restaurants, bowling alleys, and even outside grocery stores. Teenagers could walk right up, drop in some quarters, pull a knob, and walk away with a pack of cigarettes. No identification was checked, and no one questioned whether the buyer was old enough. For many teenagers, buying from vending machines was their first brush with independence. Groups of kids hung around the machines, daring each other to buy packs just for the thrill. The glowing lights of the machines made them almost inviting, blending in with arcade games and soda dispensers. The machines became hangouts for kids who often bought cigarettes just because they could. For adults, it was a convenience, but for teenagers, it was a loophole that made smoking easy and accessible. Anti-smoking campaigns had not yet taken hold in the way they would in later decades, and the dangers of tobacco were still downplayed in popular culture. By today's standards, the idea of unsupervised teenagers buying cigarettes out of a vending machine feels absurd, but in the 1970s, it proposed to revolutionize dessert, a powdered mix that required nothing but water to create a creamy, rich treat. No milk, no effort, promised the box, which should have been the first red flag. The result was a gloopy, semi-translucent blob that tasted more like disappointment than dessert. The texture hovered somewhere between spackle and regret, coating spoons in a gluey film. Even chocolate flavor couldn't hide the taste of chalk and chemicals. Kids would take one bite, wrinkle their noses, and politely ask for actual pudding next time. The advertisements showed happy families smiling around bowls of smooth perfection, but every real-life serving looked like something scraped off a cafeteria tray. It was the kind of dessert you made once just to see if it really worked, and then never again. People tried doctoring it up with whipped cream, bananas, or even instant coffee, but nothing could save it. Pronto pudding became the punchline of dinner parties, a culinary experiment that proved water and hope are not a recipe for flavor. When it finally disappeared from shelves, no one complained. They just quietly switched back to the kind of pudding that respected the concept of dairy. Aspen soda cards became high-stakes business and digital downloads replaced bubblegum comics. There were wacky packages. Small, sticky, and hilarious, these stickers were everything a kid needed to feel like they were part of something clever. They parodied real brands, Cap'n Crud cereal, Crust toothpaste, and poked fun at the everyday items in your kitchen. For children of the 1970s, they were rebellion in cartoon form. You could stick them on lockers, notebooks, lunchboxes, anywhere adults would frown and kids would laugh. It was satire before you even knew the word. You felt in on the joke, like the world was just a little less serious when you had a wacky package in hand. Packs were cheap. The thrill of tearing them open was pure adrenaline. Would you get one you already had? Would you find a rare one? The collecting was addictive, the trading even more so. Schoolyards turned into mini stock exchanges, where one kid's duplicate could be your treasure. Teachers hated them. Parents rolled their eyes. But that just made them cooler. These stickers were the beginning of a lifelong love of irony and humor for many. They taught you to question branding, to laugh at consumerism, that maybe not everything sold to you was sacred. And now, decades later, you can still picture the garish art, the warped logos, and the feeling of being clever, just for laughing at laundry detergent. Ice cream in the 1970s was not just about indulgence, it was about reinvention. The rise of diet culture meant dessert companies rushed to offer a scoop that felt guilt-free, and the magic ingredient was cyclamate. Suddenly you could open your freezer and find diet sherbets, frozen yogurts, and ice creams that promised all the sweetness without the calories. For families trying to cut back, it was like striking gold, creamy, cold, and seemingly healthy. Kids still licked cones, parents still bought pints, and few stopped to question what was making it sweet. But science had already begun whispering a warning. Studies showed cancer concerns, and the dream of endless diet ice cream began to melt under scrutiny. One by one, companies pulled the cyclamate-laced products, leaving consumers confused and even angry. Imagine eating bowls of dessert for months, only to be told it might not be safe after all. It shook trust in frozen foods, and it left diet seekers wondering what they could believe. For many, the memory of those safe scoops is tinged with irony. They were a symbol of health, yet banned for the very risks they were meant to avoid. It proved that sometimes the sweetest things can carry the bitterest truths. The central stage for family life. In the 1970s, the dining table was where families gathered nightly for meals, homework, and conversation. The table often stood beneath a chandelier, surrounded by matching chairs and cabinets filled with fine china. Meals were shared together with the expectation that everyone was present. The dining room was more than a space, it was a ritual, symbolizing unity and structure. But as lifestyles changed, the formality of nightly dinners faded. Work schedules, extracurricular activities, and the rise of television shifted family meals to kitchens, breakfast nooks, or even living room couches. Today, many homes are built without a separate dining room at all, opting instead for open-concept spaces where casual eating dominates. While special occasions may still bring families to a table, the daily ritual has largely disappeared. For those who remember it, the dining room represents a time of togetherness, when meals were central events that punctuated the rhythm of each day. Back seats. Some parents placed babies in simple carriers or even laundry baskets on the floor during long drives. On long trips, kids played games in the back, crawling over seats or sitting on the floor without a thought to safety. Parents sometimes stretched out blankets to make the car feel cozier, turning the back seat into a moving playpen. What seemed like family fun then would now make modern parents cringe. There were no strict laws requiring child restraints, and most families never thought twice about it. Car seats did exist, but they were designed more for convenience than safety, often functioning as booster chairs rather than protective devices. Road trips became free-for-alls, with kids climbing from front to back while parents drove. By modern standards, it seems reckless, but in the 1970s, it was just the way things were done. Only later did laws and awareness campaigns make car seats mandatory, changing the way families traveled forever. Pudding pops were the smooth, creamy dream that melted far too fast. Marketed as frozen pudding on a stick, they promised decadence for kids who wanted dessert on the go. They were rich, chocolatey, and oddly dense, somewhere between ice cream and frosting. When you pulled one from the freezer, frost crystals sparkled like treasure. The first bite snapped clean, then melted slowly into sweet, velvety bliss. But in 10 minutes flat, it became a sticky race against time, dripping faster than you could chase it with napkins. The first bite was heaven, cold and velvety, but by the second, they were melting faster than you could finish. Sticky hands, drippy chins, and stained shirts were the true legacy of pudding pops. Still, the flavor was worth every napkin in the box. For a generation of 1970s and 1980s kids, pudding pops were the ultimate after-school reward, proof that comfort food didn't have to make sense to be loved. They disappeared quietly from freezer aisles, but every nostalgic bite remembered today tastes like childhood, messy, sweet, and gone too soon. Danish go-rounds where the toaster cranberry garlands were the perfect family craft for the long December evenings. Parents set out bowls of popcorn, strings, and needles while the kids giggled at how hard it was to thread each piece without breaking it. The sweet and tart scent of cranberries mixed with the buttery smell of popcorn, filling the room with the kind of aroma that no candle could ever fake. Every family had its own method. Some made neat alternating patterns, while others ended up with chaotic strings that looked like abstract art. Fingers got pricked, popcorn got eaten faster than it was strung, and the dog usually stole a handful when no one was looking. But when the final garland hung from the tree, everyone stood back in quiet pride, knowing they had made something beautiful together. It was messy, imperfect, and a little chaotic, but it brought families together like few things could. These garlands draped over trees, mantles, and doorways, each one unique to the hands that made it. Even when the popcorn went stale, no one cared. It was the memory that mattered. There was a quiet pride in standing back and seeing your family's handiwork decorating the home. In a decade filled with store-bought tinsel and plastic ornaments, this small act of creating something by hand still carried the truest Christmas spirit. Glass. In the 1970s, a whole wave of diet sodas promised a slimmer waistline without giving up fizzy sweetness. The secret was cyclamate, a chemical sweetener that slipped into lemon-lime cans and cola bottles with barely a mention on the label. People saw it as a miracle. Finally, soda, without the guilt. Cyclamate was cheap, effective, and had no bitter aftertaste like the sweeteners that came before it. Housewives stocked it in their pantries, teenagers gulped it after school, and it became the quiet backbone of the diet food craze. Then came the bombshell. Lab tests on rats showed shocking cancer risks, and overnight, something that once seemed like the future of soda became a headline about danger in your glass. Soda companies scrambled, shelves shifted, and the era of cyclamate came to a screeching halt. What was left was a mix of confusion and betrayal, because millions of Americans had already been drinking it daily without a clue. It is unsettling to realize how fast a trusted product can turn into something forbidden. BB guns and pellet guns, treated as toys, reflected a time when safety concerns were far less strict. Kids received them as birthday presents or bought them with allowance money, then ran into backyards or fields to play wars without goggles or supervision. The guns looked real, fired small projectiles, and caused plenty of injuries, but that never slowed their popularity. Children lined up cans on fences, tested their aim on bottles, and sometimes even shot at each other in mock battles. Bruises, welts, and chipped windows were common, but few parents saw them as serious problems. Instead, BB guns were viewed as a training step before hunting or using real firearms. Parents often shrugged it off as part of childhood, seeing it as a step between toy cap guns and real hunting rifles. Children learned to aim, to shoot at cans or bottles, and unfortunately, sometimes at each other. It was dangerous, but it was also seen as normal, even character building. Today, strict regulations, bright safety markings, and bans on certain models make them far different from what they were. In the 1970s, though, BB guns were simply toys, symbols of a looser and riskier time. Unregulated. Before you go, share which of these brought back memories of your own childhood. Tap like if this walk through harder times hit home, and subscribe so you never miss the next journey into the world we all remember.